In this episode, we're going to focus on something that feels deceptively simple but drives a huge amount of OT risk in the real world: the physical hardware and the ports that connect that hardware to people and networks. Beginners often imagine cybersecurity as something that happens in software. Yet in OT, the physical layer is frequently where risk begins, because devices are installed in cabinets, on walls, in remote shelters, and in industrial spaces where access is not always perfectly controlled. Legacy OT hardware can include controllers, remote I/O racks, drive systems, meters, and specialized interface devices that were designed in an era when security mostly meant locking a door and keeping the system stable. Those devices often have exposed ports, removable media slots, maintenance interfaces, and legacy connectors that make support easier but also create entry points. This lesson is about recognizing physical exposure, understanding the protocol limits that come with legacy ports, and managing access in a way that respects operational needs without leaving the environment wide open. The goal is not to make you paranoid about every connector, but to help you develop a disciplined mindset. Ports are pathways. Pathways create risk, and in OT, many of those pathways are physical. Once you can see the environment as a collection of controlled interfaces, you can reason clearly about what protections matter most. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Legacy OT hardware is often installed to survive harsh conditions and run for years without interruption, and that durability is a strength that comes with trade-offs. Many devices are rugged, purpose-built, and designed for predictable operation, but they may not include modern security features like strong authentication, encrypted communications, or detailed logging. They may also have long support life cycles, meaning the same hardware remains in service long after consumer devices would have been replaced. In practice, this means that vulnerabilities can persist longer, but it also means the environment tends to be stable, and stability is part of safety. Beginners should understand that replacing OT hardware is not just buying a new box. It can require planning outages, validating changes, coordinating vendors, and ensuring that the process remains safe during transitions. Because replacement is slow and costly, organizations often rely on compensating controls, and the physical layer becomes one of the most important places to apply those controls. Another key point is that legacy hardware often includes ports that were intended for local maintenance, like configuration consoles, diagnostic connectors, and field bus interfaces. Those ports can be essential for troubleshooting, which is why they remain available, but availability also means exposure if access is not controlled. Managing legacy hardware is therefore about balancing supportability with protection. Physical exposure is the reality that many OT devices are installed in places where access is not as tightly controlled as people assume. A controller cabinet might be in a locked room, but a remote panel might be in a hallway, a mechanical closet, or an outdoor enclosure. A sensor interface might be in a ceiling space, a pump station shelter, or a warehouse corner that many people can reach. In critical infrastructure, sites can be geographically spread out, and remote locations often have weaker physical security simply because staffing and surveillance are limited. Physical exposure matters because if someone can touch the device, they can potentially plug into a port, press a button, flip a switch, or alter wiring, and those actions can bypass network-based controls. Beginners sometimes think physical access is rare, but in many facilities, contractors, maintenance staff, and operations personnel move through OT spaces daily. That does not mean they are untrustworthy. It means the environment must assume that many legitimate people can physically reach equipment, which increases the chance of mistakes and increases the need for accountability. Physical exposure also includes accidental exposure, like cabinets left open after maintenance, missing faceplates, or unlabeled ports that invite curious connections. A disciplined OT environment treats physical condition as part of security posture. Ports are the concrete pathways through which devices communicate and through which humans often interact with devices. And in OT, you will see a mix of legacy and modern interfaces on the same equipment. Legacy ports can include serial connectors, field bus connectors, proprietary programming ports, and removable media slots that accept storage used for backups or firmware. Modern ports can include Ethernet interfaces and USB, which are powerful because they make integration and maintenance easier. The challenge is that each port represents an access method, and legacy designs often assume that if you can reach the port, you are allowed to use it. That assumption made sense in small, closed environments, but it becomes risky as sites become more connected and as more people interact with equipment. Beginners should learn to think of a port as an implicit promise. If the port exists, it likely enables some kind of capability, such as reading data, writing configuration, downloading logic, or accessing diagnostics. Some ports are passive, meaning they mostly transmit information, while others are active, meaning they can accept commands and changes. The safe approach is to identify which ports exist, what they are used for, and what the consequences are if an unauthorized person uses them. This thinking turns lots of connectors into a manageable set of control points. One category of ports that deserves special attention is maintenance and programming interfaces, because these are often the paths by which control logic and device configuration are changed. A programming port on a controller, a local console port, or a vendor-specific interface can give deep access, sometimes including the ability to read logic, modify logic, or change parameters that affect how equipment behaves. In many legacy systems, these interfaces were designed for technicians to use locally, and strong authentication may not be present because physical access was assumed to be the barrier. That means if physical access is weak, the programming interface becomes a high-risk pathway. Beginners should also understand that even authorized use of these ports is sensitive, because mistakes during programming or configuration can cause downtime or unsafe behavior. This is why disciplined procedures, role clarity, and change control are so important when using maintenance interfaces. It is also why dedicated engineering workstations and controlled maintenance devices are often used, because they reduce the chance that a random laptop with unknown software connects to a critical port. Another practical point is that many organizations keep legacy ports accessible because they are needed for recovery, such as restoring configurations after a failure. Managing these ports safely means preserving their usefulness while ensuring they are not casually reachable or casually used. Removable media and USB-style access create another set of risks, especially in legacy environments where software updates and configuration transfers were commonly done by physically carrying files. Even when a system is standalone, removable media can become the bridge that brings content into the environment. The risk is not only malware, but also the introduction of wrong configurations, outdated firmware, or mismatched project files that alter behavior. Beginners sometimes focus on malicious threats, but accidental errors with removable media are common because people grab the wrong file or use a device that has been used elsewhere. In legacy OT, where devices may not have modern scanning or endpoint protections, a single contaminated drive can affect multiple systems over time. This is why disciplined media handling procedures matter, including controlling which media are allowed, ensuring media are checked in controlled ways, and maintaining clear labeling and accountability. It is also why organizations often prefer dedicated media that stays within the OT environment rather than media that travels between networks. From an exam perspective, when you see scenarios involving USB drives, removable storage, or file transfers into OT, the safest answer often involves tightening process controls and limiting cross-environment movement. This is not about banning all media forever. It is about managing a high-risk pathway responsibly. Protocol limits are another part of legacy hardware and port management, because many legacy protocols were designed without modern security expectations and often behave in ways that complicate monitoring and access control. A serial protocol might not support strong identity, meaning any device on the line could potentially speak the protocol if it knows the structure. A proprietary protocol might not integrate with modern monitoring tools, meaning visibility is limited. Some legacy protocols assume a trusted bus, meaning they do not distinguish between a legitimate master and an illegitimate one. These limits do not automatically make the environment unsafe, but they shift where you apply control. Instead of relying on protocol-level authentication, you rely on physical isolation, controlled gateways, and strict rules about who can connect devices and when. Beginners should also understand that protocol limits can create operational fragility, meaning a misconnection or misconfiguration can disrupt communications for multiple devices. In a shared bus environment, adding a device with the wrong settings can cause widespread errors, which is why change discipline matters. From a security viewpoint, protocol limits mean that network exposure is especially dangerous, because if a legacy protocol is reachable from broader segments, an attacker may not need to break encryption or authentication to interact with devices. The correct mindset is to treat legacy protocol zones as high-trust zones that should be kept small and controlled. Access management is the discipline of deciding who can reach the hardware, who can use which ports, and under what conditions, and it has both physical and procedural components. Physical access management includes locked rooms, secured cabinets, tamper-evident seals, controlled keys, and surveillance, but it also includes practical habits like keeping cabinets closed and keeping ports covered when not in use. Procedural access management includes requiring authorization for maintenance work, documenting changes, ensuring the right people are present, and having a clear handoff process so that responsibility is never ambiguous. Beginners sometimes think access control is only about passwords, but in OT, access control often starts with where your feet can go and what your hands can touch. Another important idea is least privilege, meaning people should have only the access they need to do their job, and that applies physically as well as digitally. For example, a contractor might need access to a specific panel for a specific task, but not to other panels and not to programming interfaces unrelated to their work. Accountability matters too, because when access is shared and changes are not tracked, problems become harder to investigate and trust breaks down between teams. Many OT incidents become worse because people cannot confidently answer who touched what and when. Good access management reduces both malicious risk and accidental risk by making actions deliberate and traceable. Legacy hardware management also includes the reality of ports that are exposed unintentionally, such as unused Ethernet jacks, open switch ports, or dangling cables that were left after past projects. These are common in environments that have evolved over years, especially when multiple contractors have performed work and documentation is incomplete. Unused ports are risky because they create unknown pathways, and unknown pathways are attractive both to attackers and to accidental misconnection. A beginner should understand that a port does not have to be actively used to be dangerous. It only has to be reachable and capable. In some cases, an unused port might provide access to a sensitive segment, and plugging in a device could create traffic that disrupts operations or exposes devices to new communication attempts. This is why port management includes not only controlling active ports, but also identifying and disabling unused ports where possible, and labeling and documenting what remains. In legacy environments, disabling ports may not always be easy, but even simple steps like physically locking cabinets, using port covers, and maintaining accurate diagrams reduce risk. This is also where inventory work matters, because knowing what devices and connections exist is a prerequisite to controlling them. On exam questions, you will often find that the safest choice involves reducing unnecessary exposure by controlling or eliminating unused access points. That reflects real-world OT discipline. Beginners also need to understand that operational continuity depends on maintaining access for legitimate maintenance and recovery, which is why access management cannot be purely restrictive. If you lock down every port with no procedure for emergency work, you may slow recovery during an outage and increase safety risk. The goal is controlled access, not blocked access, meaning there are known, approved ways to perform necessary tasks with accountability and safeguards. This might include using specific approved maintenance devices, requiring two-person rules for sensitive changes, ensuring that backups and recovery media are maintained securely, and having clear change approval paths. In OT, emergencies happen, and when they happen, people will do what they must to restore safe operation, so planning for emergency access is part of security. Beginners often think security is strongest when it is hardest to do anything, but in OT, security must be compatible with safe and timely response. A controlled process for urgent access is safer than forcing people to improvise under pressure because improvisation often bypasses safeguards. This is also why training and culture matter, because people need to understand why access rules exist and how to follow them even when stressed. In exam scenarios, answers that acknowledge operational needs while still enforcing accountability are often the most realistic and correct. A final misconception to address is the idea that legacy hardware is mainly a technical debt problem, when it is also a governance and lifecycle problem. Technical debt is real, but the bigger challenge is that the environment must remain safe and reliable while gradually improving security over years, not weeks. That means choosing upgrades carefully, planning replacements, and prioritizing the most exposed and highest impact pathways first. Often the most meaningful early improvements are simple: secure cabinets, control keys, document ports, restrict portable device use, and tighten procedures for who can connect and when. Over time, modernization can reduce reliance on weak legacy protocols and expose fewer maintenance interfaces to casual access. But modernization itself introduces risk, so it must be managed like any other OT change. Beginners should also remember that attackers do not need an exotic exploit if physical exposure is high. Sometimes the easiest path is an exposed port and an environment that assumes nobody will touch it. That is why physical exposure is such a central theme. It is the difference between theoretical vulnerability and practical reachability. When you treat ports as pathways and manage those pathways deliberately, you reduce the chance that legacy limitations become catastrophic weaknesses. This mindset is both practical and exam relevant. To close, managing legacy OT hardware and ports is about seeing the environment as a set of physical interfaces that shape both operational capability and security exposure. Legacy devices are durable and long-lived, but they often lack modern security features and rely on trusted environments, which makes physical access control and disciplined procedures essential. Physical exposure is common because devices are distributed across facilities and remote sites, and that exposure turns ports into real-world entry points if not controlled. Protocol limits on legacy ports mean you often cannot rely on strong built-in authentication, so you compensate with segmentation, controlled gateways, and strict rules for connecting devices and performing maintenance. Access management must balance protection with supportability, ensuring that legitimate work and emergency recovery can happen through controlled, accountable processes rather than improvisation. Unused and undocumented ports are especially risky because they create unknown pathways, and reducing unknowns through inventory, labeling, and controlled shutdown of unused access points is a foundational control. When you can reason about hardware, ports, physical exposure, and access as a unified system, you can answer security OT plus questions with mature judgment because you will be choosing controls that are practical, layered, and aligned with OT reality.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.